Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for what might be our most abstract and philosophically demanding journey yet. We are leaving the world of quantifiable metrics, concrete history, and diving headfirst into the really big questions about existence itself. We're talking about the relationship between the eternal, infinite divine and, well, us, the temporary limited realm of space and time.
Indeed. And the source material we're looking at today, it's not your typical history lesson, not at all. It's this dense, really concentrated exploration of, you could call it ontological necessity, what has to be true about existence. It really forces us to grapple with the nature of the creator, the specific constraints placed on our reality, the spatio-temporal world we live in, and crucially, what metaphysically must happen for sin, death, imperfection, for all that to be completely, annihilated from the fabric of creation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission then is to follow the source's argument about maybe the greatest paradox there is. How can a timeless, infinite, omnipotent being interact with, and specifically enter, the finite, temporary world that we inhabit? And this is key to the source's core argument. Why is this specific interaction needing the incarnation, the second person becoming the creature, and the trauma of the cross? Why is that the only way for creation to truly be, well, completed?
Exactly. And what's fascinating here, I think, is that the source material doesn't just offer an explanation, it does more than that. It fundamentally forces us to question our most basic assumptions about what we even define as real or existent or permanent. We have to sort of temporarily suspend our belief that time flows neatly in a line or that space has these fixed limits we understand, because these concepts, they define us, but for the infinite, they hold an entirely different meaning, or maybe perhaps almost negligible meaning.
Right, that cognitive dissonance. Yeah. It's central, isn't it? Yeah. We're essentially trying to understand a reality that's fundamentally, maybe even definitionally, incompatible with the limits of our own perception. We probably need to define some terms early on just for clarity, because the source uses some pretty specific theological language. When we talk about the divine, we're referencing a triune structure. The sources often refer to the ultimate source, the ground of all existence, as the first person. And then the active agent, the one who sustains everything and, crucially, becomes the creature. Yeah. That's the second person.
Precisely. And our goal today is really to extract that core argument, to understand the sheer chasm between the creator and the created, and then trace the path the divine takes to bridge that gap. But importantly, how it does so without violating its own infinite nature or, well, destroying the very fragile life it sought to create in the first place.
Okay, let's start there. Section 1, the infinite God versus spatio-temporal creation. So the relationship dynamics. How does the infinite creator relate to and interact with this finite creation of space and time? Section 1.1 in the outline gets right into it. The immanence and concealment of God. The source presents this duality straight away. It says God fills both the eternal infinite and our spatio-temporal world simultaneously.
Yes, and this is such a crucial starting point. It defines God as entirely transcendent, completely beyond existence as we know it yet. At the same time, wholly immanent, present within existence. God is constantly sustaining that infinite reality, the unbounded, always eternal realm that's ongoing. But when interacting with time and space, God simultaneously fills that entire structure, but also chooses to conceal self within that limited structure. And this concealment, it's presented as an act of preservation.
Preservation. Why is that concealment necessary? It's being preserved.
Well, think about it. If the full, unshielded reality of the divine were revealed, without any filter, without any divine self-limitation, the source suggests that the fragile structure of time and space itself, and certainly the creatures within it, simply couldn't handle the ontological weight, the sheer reality of the infinite that uses the analogy. It'd be like trying to stare directly into the sun without any protection, only, amplified to the scale of cosmic annihilation. It's too much.
Wow. Okay. So to manage this necessary interaction while still maintaining that essential concealment, the source says God places specific structures within time and space. It mentions a throne and a name placed on that throne.
Exactly. That's the mechanism for controlled interaction, for revelation that doesn't annihilate. The name and the throne it's associated with, they create this localized point, a focus, where creatures, even limited creatures like us, can actually recognize, worship, and importantly, relate to the power of the creator. Even though there's this overwhelming concealment surrounding that point, it's like the designated address label for the divine within the created universe.
But the source also notes this name and throne serve another purpose, right? Something more administrative.
Yes, absolutely. It acts as the command structure for the created realm. Through the authority that's vested in that specific name, God issues commands. These commands go to higher non-physical beings, The text mentions angels, who then govern and rule the spatio-temporal realm on God's behalf. So picture isn't that our world is just, spontaneously operating on its own. It's constantly being ruled, managed by these agencies. And they receive their authority directly from that localized divine presence, signified by the name and throne. This entire apparatus, this setup, it exists purely to mediate the infinite's interaction with the finite, to make it possible without destruction.
This immediately sets up just how profoundly limited creaturely knowledge must be, which is 1.2 in our sources. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because the text is very specific. It hammers home just how restricted our perception actually is. It emphasizes that the creature that's us can only know what God allows them to know. There's no independent access beyond that.
Right. And the source uses these really tangible physical examples, things we can grasp, to bring home just how tiny our window of perception truly is. Consider the sun again. We literally cannot properly look at it without being blinded or, suffering serious damage. Our very instruments of sight, our eyes, they fail when confronted with even finite but still immense physical power, like the sun's.
And it gets even more personal, doesn't it? The source mentions that we cannot even count the hairs on our own head. That seems almost trivial at first glance. But when you stop and think about it, we're talking about our own body, something we inhabit constantly. Yet we lack the sustained attention, or maybe the computational power, to perfectly catalog one of its most common features.
Exactly. It's a simple illustration of a profound limit. And maybe the most impactful illustration, the one that really hits our existential limitation, concerns time itself. The source states plainly, we cannot, by sheer force of will, or even through any technological advance we might dream up, extend our own lifespan by a single second. Not 1 second beyond the parameters set by the Creator. We are absolutely powerless over the most crucial ontological feature of our existence, its duration, how long we last. We are fundamentally restricted. The text concludes, we only know very restricted things. That's the takeaway.
I think the challenge the source presents here is just profound. If we as creatures can't even fully master or understand the basic components of our own finite existence, like the structure of our bodies, the duration of our time, how could we ever possibly hope to grasp the infinite Creator?
The source really drives this point home. It cleverly uses our ability to imagine infinity against us in a way. We can conceptualize infinite scale, right? An endless line of numbers, a universe without bounds in our mind's eye. But the text argues, anything that could be fully recognized, fully contained, or fully conceptualized by our finite thought process, even the thought of an infinite being, if we could truly wrap our minds around it, that being wouldn't rightly be called omnipotent.
So wait. The very act of successfully imagining God in a way that feels complete to us, that means we've actually failed to grasp God's true nature.
That's what it suggests. It implies God is necessarily greater than that imagination, fundamentally beyond it. If God were understandable by us, God would, by definition, be finite, because our understanding itself is finite, this ontological barrier, this fundamental gap in comprehension. That's the first great truth the source says we have to accept before we can even begin to understand the rest of the argument. The Creator exceeds the highest boundaries of what we can even conceptualize as infinite.
Wow. That distinction is crucial, and it brings us directly to point 1.3, the nature of existence and time. Because to truly understand the Creator, the source says we first have to redefine what time itself is. And it explicitly identifies time, along with the concepts we associate with it, past, present, and future. It calls time itself a creature, a created thing.
Yes. This is a massive theological claim, and it really sets the entire structure for the argument that follows. Time isn't some neutral dimension in which God operates. It's an object, a finite creation brought into being by God, just like space or matter or life itself.
And the philosophical implication of that, it's enormous, isn't it? If time is a creature, then the Creator is by definition not bound by time. If God were actually governed by the flow of time, if God experienced a linear sequence where one moment is gone forever and the next hasn't arrived yet, the source argues God wouldn't be omnipotent. Couldn't be, and certainly couldn't possibly sustain the infinite constantly.
Think about it. If God experienced a past, that implies God has changed in some way, or that some aspect of God's reality has ceased to exist. That directly contradicts the definition of eternal completeness, of unchanging perfection. The moment you define time as a created object, you automatically define the Creator as simultaneously external to it and also wholly encompassing of it, outside and inside at once.
The source connects this directly to the concept of the perpetual now. Can you unpack that? Since God exists simultaneously in all moments, the source says the entirety of the past, the present, and the entire future are sustained by God concurrently.
Right. It means God also experiences and sustains all those moments equally, without sequence. For the divine, every single moment in the entire history of time and space is perpetually now. It's all present at once. The instant of creation, this conversation we're having right now, and the final state of perfected reality. For the Creator, they aren't sequential. They're not one after another. They are co-present, held together in a single eternal instant.
That concept is just staggering to try and grasp. It means what we perceive as history, with all its cause and effect, its sequence, that's just the way we experience the completed structure of time. But for the author, it's like the entire book is already written and open on a single page.
Exactly. And this leads directly into the next idea, 1.4, that time and space are essentially foreign concepts to the divine. Because time and space, ETS, are created things, the source suggests God regards them as if it did not exist.
That is incredibly difficult for us to process. I mean, our entire reality, our entire sense of permanence is defined by those two constructs, space and time. If my house is real, it occupies space and it persists through time. That's what real means to us. But for the Creator, this entire structure, it's temporary, it's optional, it's secondary to true being.
Right. It highlights the crucial difference the source makes between being in God and being part of God. Time and space are sustained in God. They exist within the overarching divine reality, but they are not part of God. They aren't components of the divine essence itself. They are creatures, temporary constructs, however real they seem to us.
And the source takes this idea even further, doesn't it? Introduces the concept of non-existence or non-being. It says that even non-existence is in God, but again, not part of God. How does that work?
It means that whether time and space exist or whether non-existence exists, or rather is present in its unmanifested potential state, God remains wholly complete, unaffected, perfect. God is the only true absolute existence. Everything else, time, space, creatures, physical laws, even the potential for them, is merely called into existence by God's will. Activated, you might say. And by extension, the source implies it returns to non-existence the instant God chooses to withdraw that call, that sustaining act of will.
So if time and space are optional, like a specific program running on an infinite operating system, this immediately frames the next huge philosophical problem. Why run the program at all? Especially since, as the source is about to argue, the creation seems inherently unstable from the start.
Right. Now we have to shift gears a bit. We move from the nature of the Creator, which we've established as infinite and unbound by time, to the inherent fragility of the creature. If God is perfectly complete, why create beings whose free will is described right from the outset as incomplete?
The source states this very clearly in 2.1. It says, creatures live by the life of God, they borrow their existence, but their free will is not yet completed, end quote. And this incomplete nature, which the source presents as maybe a necessary state for any created, non-omnipotent being, it carries a severe, almost predetermined risk.
This is probably the source's most challenging claim, maybe the most seemingly deterministic one. It says the potential for sin, the text uses the phrase, the possibility of committing crime, remains in the creature precisely because the creature is unfinished, incomplete. And here's the shocking part, the conclusion it draws. If these uncompleted creatures are simply left alone in that state, the text states they will eventually all necessarily sin. It presents it as an inevitability tied to their unfinished architecture. Not necessarily a flaw in the initial design itself, but an outcome of incompleteness.
Okay, as a listener, that really challenges the core meaning of free will, doesn't it? If sin is necessary, if the outcome is somehow predetermined by their current state, then where's the freedom in the choice? Doesn't that make the creature seem inherently rigged to fail?
That's the exact uncomfortable point the source compels us to explore. It forces us to make a distinction between initial free will and completed free will. The initial will, you could think of it like maybe an electrical circuit. It's technically functional. It can make a choice, but it's ungrounded, unstable. It can choose, but the overwhelming pull of its own incompleteness, its own self-definition, its limits as a creature makes failure the guaranteed statistical outcome over time. The will is free enough to choose wrongly, yes, but it's not yet grounded or complete enough to consistently maintain perfect obedience indefinitely on its own.
So the goal of divine intervention that follows, it isn't primarily to punish the inevitable failure, but to fundamentally complete the creature's architecture, to ground the circuit so that perfect choice becomes ontologically certain.
Precisely. Which brings us right to 2.2. The risk of unveiled divinity. Given this inherent instability, this guaranteed eventual failure if left alone, a direct, full reveal of the Creator to these uncompleted creatures is simply impossible. It can't happen.
Right, because as we discussed, if God were to reveal self directly, fully unveiled, without those mechanisms of concealment like the name and throne, the source says the creatures would all be extinguished, consumed, obliterated.
It's an ontological incompatibility. If the incomplete creature meets the infinite reality head-on, the creature simply ceases to exist. It's overwhelmed, unable to sustain its own being in the face of that absolute reality. So, to save the creature, and crucially, to complete its free will, God must perform this incredible act of self-abnegation, a deliberate emptying of self. It's known in theology as kenosis. And the source says God must do this, must empty self, and become a creature.
This is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The infinite must become finite. The boundless must become contained within limits. And the reason is specifically because the boundless presence, in its fullness, would destroy the very thing it sought to save and perfect.
Which leads us directly to 2.3 and the absolutely crucial role of the second person of the divine. The first person remains the ultimate source, the hidden infinite, the ground of being. But following the will of the first person, the second person is the one who empties self, performs the kenosis, and becomes a creature within the framework of time and space.
And this act, which the source readily admits is incomprehensible to us, that is the bridge. And the source emphasizes, importantly, that despite this radical self-limitation, all divine fullness still resides somehow within this divine creature. This act of becoming limited isn't a reduction of divinity, but the mechanism by which the creation is fixed.
Yes. Through this unique divine creature, time and space are reconciled, they're stabilized, and ultimately the source says they are completed. The finite nature of the creature is finally married to the infinite nature of the creator in a way that the initial creation on its own could never achieve. It establishes a stable link.
And this completion, this bridging, it establishes a new order, a new hierarchy within creation that's detailed in 2.4. The divine creature becomes the firstborn among creatures, like the template, the blueprint for the completed reality.
Exactly. Following this firstborn, the template, the now completed creature, transitions into being what the source calls a son of God. The process essentially means that the divine creature becomes the perfect image of God within the confines of time and space, the visible manifestation. And then the creature follows suit, becoming a perfected image of God, reflecting that primary image.
And what is the defining practical result of this completion for time and space itself? How does it address that initial problem, the necessity of sin due to incompleteness?
Crucially, the source claims the very possibility of committing sin is extinguished in the creature. Sin is removed not just as a potential bad choice, but as an ontological possibility within the completed framework of the creature's being. Sin is extinguished from time and space entirely, wiped from the system, you could say.
That's a really powerful distinction. It's not just that sins are forgiven or overlooked. The very ability to commit them is removed by this act of completion, which means the creature's free will is finally grounded, perfected, and reliably oriented towards the good.
And the source then describes the ultimate outcome of this whole process in very grand terms, that the first person, the ultimate source, becomes the entirety of time and space, which suggests a total absorption, maybe, or unification of the entire structure of creation with its ultimate source.
But, and this is a really important but, the source immediately inserts a vital clarification right after making that huge statement. It seems designed to prevent the listener or the reader from drawing a potentially dangerous conclusion about what that unification means for the creature.
Absolutely not. The source is extremely careful here. God becoming the entirety of time and space does not mean that the completed creature suddenly gains divine attributes. It's not apotheosis.
Specifically, it doesn't mean the completed creature can now exist simultaneously in the past, present, and future like God does in the perpetual now.
Right, because, as we established earlier, if the creature could exist simultaneously in all moments, that creature would, by definition, be omnipotent and omnipresent. It would effectively be God. The completion of time and space and the extinguishing of sin elevates the creature to its highest possible state, its intended perfection, but the fundamental boundary, the ontological distinction between the creator and the created, that remains absolute. The creature remains bounded by time even when perfected. Still moving, as the source says, beautifully along the infinite extension of time, but moving nonetheless, not static, not outside time.
Okay, so we've established the necessity of the incarnation, the second person becoming a creature to fix this incompleteness. Now we have to confront the paradoxes that the source itself explicitly labels as unknowable to us, the creatures.
Right. Section 3 delves into these deep mysteries. The first is 3.1, the mystery of self-containment. Just the sheer logical impossibility from our perspective of the second person confining self within the extreme limitations of time and space, while simultaneously continuing to sustain the boundless, infinite reality outside of time and space. How can you be infinite and finite at the exact same time?
And what's really striking here is the source's humility, isn't it? It doesn't try to offer some complex philosophical formula to explain it away. It states quite explicitly that we cannot know what this means. Full stop.
Our logic, our understanding of physics, it's based on things like conservation of energy, spatial limitations. One thing can't be in two places, let alone be infinite and finite simultaneously. We simply cannot grasp how an infinite being, by definition unbound, can willingly take on the limitations of finitude without ceasing to be infinite in the process.
And this mystery extends to the act of emptying itself, the kenosis.
Yes. The second person is eternally the same, constant, immutable, that's core doctrine. Yet performs this profound act of emptying self, of changing state by becoming a creature. Our reality dictates that something either changes or it remains the same. It can't really do both simultaneously in the same respect. But the source suggests the divine reality, being truly omnipotent, accommodates this kind of ontological contradiction.
So we have to fall back on that earlier principle.
Yeah.
That God is necessarily greater than our imagination, greater than our logic.
I think that's what the source implies. If the divine nature is truly omnipotent, then it must be capable of actions that appear logically impossible from our limited spatio-temporal perspective. The act of self-limitation, becoming a creature, was required for our existence and completion. But the how of it, the mechanism, is eternally hidden from us. It's beyond our pay grade, essentially.
Then we get to the absolute core of the redemptive action, the cross. Section 3.2 details the incomprehensible pain of the separation between the first person and the second person during the crucifixion. And this is where the source explicitly uses human analogy while also acknowledging its limits.
Right. We're instructed to try and grasp it using our most painful human experience. The source suggests something like the profound, visceral pain of being utterly cut off from a loved one, like a family relationship being severed at the deepest level. But the source immediately recognizes how inadequate that comparison is. A human separation is physical or emotional or psychological. A divine separation between the first and second persons, that's ontological. It's a rupture in the very structure of eternal being. Incomparable.
And this raises what might be the most terrifying and critical question the source asks about the cross. Was the suffering experienced by the second person merely pain felt within the confines of time and space? A localized event lasting a finite number of hours on a Friday afternoon? Or because the first and second persons exist simultaneously in that perpetual now, covering all of time at once? Was the pain of the cross actually the infinite pain of all moments past, present, and future, experienced concurrently by the divine nature within that creaturely form?
If that second possibility is true, and the source leaves it open as a profound mystery, it completely redefines the nature of suffering. The cross wasn't just a historical event located at one point in time. It was potentially an eternal, non-linear trauma felt across the entire span of created time. A suffering somehow proportional to the infinite nature of the one experiencing it, compressed into that finite moment of dereliction. The source just leaves this hanging as an open mystery. Because, again, we lack the cognitive framework. We can't compute the scale of infinite pain compressed into a finite event.
And then there's this other impossibility the source highlights, almost a logistical one. The second person, having become a creature, is still the one who, according to the source's model, constantly sustains the infinite. And by extension, sustains time and space itself. That's his ongoing role.
Exactly, that's the premise. Yet, at the moment of the cross, the cry of dereliction suggests the second person was, in some profound way, cut off from the first person, the ultimate source of being and power. Logically, based on the model, this should have resulted in the immediate ontological collapse of everything. Time and space should have blinked out of existence, the sustaining link was broken, or seemed to be.
But obviously, time and space continued to exist. History kept rolling. The source points to this as another devastating logistical mystery, something we simply cannot explain. If the engine is disconnected from the main power supply, how does the machine possibly continue to run?
It really solidifies the idea that the events of the cross, while happening in time and space, somehow transcended the very laws of time and space that the divine itself established. It's presented as this point of ultimate paradox, where the established rules of existence were intentionally and incomprehensibly bent or suspended to achieve this greater purpose of redemption and completion.
Okay, so if the mechanism of the cross is shrouded in these deep mysteries, what about its purpose? Moving to 3.3, the source is clearer on the why.
Yes, if the how is mysterious, the goal is presented relatively clearly: communication and completion. The love of God, the source argues, is revealed through this extreme act of the cross, specifically to inform creatures of that love. It's done in a way that resonates with their limited perception, using concepts they understand, like suffering and sacrifice, even if the divine reality of it is beyond them. It's the necessary signpost within the created world.
And the source adds a critical conditional statement here, linking back to that initial problem of creation's instability. It says, if creatures did not exist, the cross would be entirely unnecessary.
Which carries a huge implication. It means this whole horrific, incomprehensible act of divine separation and suffering is only required within the context of time and space. It's the necessary mechanism specifically to complete the creature and eliminate that inherent possibility of sin we discussed. For the infinite, eternal reality outside of creation, the cross is, in a sense, a redundant concept. It's a solution tailored specifically and only for the problem of the incomplete creature living within the confines of time and space.
All right, having explored the act of completion via the incarnation and cross, let's shift perspective again. Let's look at the true final nature of reality, especially for the divine perspective. This is section 4, exploring time and space as potentially illusory constructs. So what does all this mean when we confront that cognitive barrier between existence versus non-existence?
Well, for us creatures, as the source points out in 4.1, everything is very dualistic, very rigidly defined. Something either is or it is not. An event is either real or it was a dream, black or white. And the source suggests God sustains our perception precisely within this rigid dualistic structure because that's the only way our finite minds can function, make decisions, navigate reality.
But for God, that structure, that duality, it breaks down.
That's the hypothesis. The source speculates that, from the divine perspective, time and space might be neither existing nor non-existing, or perhaps neither real nor a dream. It could exist in some state of unknowable ambiguity relative to the absolute reality of the divine.
And our inability to grasp this non-dual state, it's absolutely...
The source implies it is, because we simply lack the sensory or intellectual instruments to perceive anything outside the categories of is or is not. It even makes the point. If God hadn't even created the concept of a dream within our minds, we wouldn't even have the mental capacity to hypothesize about time and space being like a dream to the Creator. Our capacity for this kind of philosophical speculation is itself a created, limited gift from God. We only think with the tools we've been given.
This forces us into what the outline calls the paradox of non-being in 4.2. For us, non-existence is just nothing, the void, the absolute absence of being.
But the source critically challenges that simple definition. It does so by noting that God calls non-existence into existence. Genesis 1, right? God brings forth the universe from what was previously non-existent. Now, if God can summon it into being, interact with it, draw from it, then non-existence cannot be a true void, a true nothing. It must already be in God in some way, existing in some form prior to its manifestation as time and space.
So non-existence isn't the lack of God, but rather a latency, a potentiality within God.
Absolutely. That seems to be the implication. That's why the text proposes this truly mind-bending definition, or perhaps speculation. Non-existence could potentially be understood as existence existing as non-existence. It's not nothingness, it's being, but in a latent, unmanifested potential state, held entirely within the Creator.
So the act of creation isn't making something from absolute nothing, but more like God selecting potential existence, which we perceive as non-existence, and activating it, projecting it into this spatio-temporal framework we call reality.
That's one way to conceptualize it, yes. And the source attempts to bridge this massive cognitive gap for us using the dream analogy in 4.3. It argues we understand the concept of dreams only because God allows us to dream. And dreams themselves demonstrate that we can experience a form of reality non-linearly, where the usual rules of time and space are incredibly malleable.
Right. In a dream, time and space can be radically altered. You can feel like you live 100 years, you can travel instantly across galaxies, experience profound emotional depth, only to wake up a few hours later, still lying in the same spot, and immediately recognize that your entire dream life, however vivid, was not real, in the same way your waking life is.
Exactly. The analogy is potent because it illustrates that the experience within the dream is undeniably real while it is happening. It feels completely true, yet it's utterly unsubstantial, ephemeral when viewed from the higher reality of waking life. The source uses this experience, which God gave us, to speculate. Maybe time and space is merely like a dream to God, a period of intense experience reality for the inhabitants, but one that lasts only a finite span before the Creator, metaphorically, wakes up, having never actually left the eternal now.
But if our existence is like a dream to God, does that diminish our struggles? Does it make our love, our pain, our choices less meaningful? That's a scary thought.
The source seems to imply it doesn't diminish the meaning for us, because God sustains our perception as real within the context of this dream or created order. Our experience is validated by God's sustaining act. However, it does profoundly change the definition of permanent. If time and space is analogous to a dream, it simply means that our reality is entirely dependent on the continuous attention, the continuous will of the dreamer God. If the Creator withdraws that attention, that sustaining call, the dream ends, and we, the creatures, would presumably return to that state of latent non-existence, which, remember, is still held in God, not lost, but unmanifested.
Okay, and finally in 4.4, the source uses one more analogy, the movie analogy. This is to describe the state of completion and God's perpetual perspective. It speculates that time and space might be situated somewhere near the boundary between existence and non-existence.
Yes, and the analogy is highly visual. It suggests time and space is like a movie being screened. We, the creatures within it, are like the audience members, or maybe even the actors trapped within the narrative. We're limited to watching the film roll frame by frame, minute by minute. We're confined to the linear flow of the story.
But the critical distinction, again, is the perspective of the author or the director or maybe the projectionist. For God, the movie is already completed. Time and space as a structure is finished. Every frame has already played out from start to finish. The entire sequence is already resolved and known.
This is a direct consequence, really, of that perpetual now principle we discussed earlier. God is simultaneously present in every moment of the movie. The first scene, the climactic battle, the final resolution scene, they are all equally present and available to God's awareness. God holds the entire completed reel.
However, and this is crucial for understanding our final state, we, the creatures, remain within the movie. We are confined to its infinite extension of time, experiencing it moment by moment. We are still watching the film roll, living out the scenes, even though the author already holds the completed reel. This setup is key to understanding the final paradox about creaturely eternity.
Right. Which brings us to section 5, the final state. What does it mean to be eternal yet bounded?
Let's bring this full circle then. We've gone through creation, incompleteness, the cross, completion, the potential illusory nature of TS. What about the state of the completed creature? If sin is extinguished, if free will is perfected, what does eternity actually look like for us, who the source insists are still constrained by time and space?
The source draws a very stark and I think very important boundary line in 5.1, the limitations of creaturely eternity. Even in this final perfected state, after all the completion work is done, the creature cannot escape time and space, cannot transcend it. We are elevated, we are perfected, we are made sons of God, but we remain creatures defined by our creatureliness.
So our eternity, then, is defined not as timelessness, not as joining the divine in that perpetual now outside of sequence, but merely as the infinite extension of time. We're given infinite duration within time, but we remain bound to its flow.
Exactly. We live forever, but we live forever sequentially. And the source suggests this is actually necessary because the completed creature still requires sequence for growth and experience. The source explicitly notes that the perfected creature will continue to mature, continue to learn new things, and continue to change beautifully along the flow of time forever. Change and growth, by their very nature, require a succession of moments, a before and an after, which means an ongoing dependency on time. If we couldn't change, if we became static even in perfection, arguably that wouldn't be perfection. Perfection in this view implies ongoing beautiful maturity and discovery, which needs time.
And this serves as the ultimate reminder then of that fundamental difference between the creator and the created, reinforcing point 5.2. We know we are not God, precisely because we know we cannot exist simultaneously in all moments past, present, and future. That limitation is our permanent ontological hallmark.
Precisely. If any creature were not limited by time and space, if it could access the perpetual now, that creature would possess omnipotence and omnipresence by definition. That creature would be God. Our continued limitation by time, even in eternal glory, is the definitive proof that we remain created beings, and that the separation, the distinction between the first person and even the most perfected creature, though incredibly close, remains absolute and unbridgeable in essence.
And whose limitation, this creaturely existence, is sustained purely by the will of the creator.
Yes, the source loops back to that fundamental point. It reminds us that creatures, even perfected ones, only exist for as long as God sustains them, as long as God continues to issue that call to existence. If God were ever to withdraw that call, the source implies we would instantly return to that state of non-existence, the latent existence, which is ultimately also held in God.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this. It's incredibly dense. What are the core insights we can pull from the entire source material, tying together the nature of the divine and the nature of our reality?
Okay, let's try. First, God fills the infinite constantly, remaining eternally whole, complete, unaffected by anything outside of self. God is definitionally greater than any concept of infinity or omniscience that we as creatures can possibly conceive. We can't box God in.
Second, time and space and everything within it, including existence as we know it and even non-existence as potentiality, is fundamentally a creature residing in God, sustained by God. Yet from God's perspective, this entire structure is regarded as if it were nothing, because it's optional, secondary to the divine essence.
Third, the initial creation, specifically the creature with its incomplete free will, was inherently unstable. It required this almost unthinkable act of divine self-abnegation, the incarnation of the second person becoming a creature, to complete that free will and extinguish the built-in necessity of sinning. And the mechanism for this, the cross, is itself presented as an unknowable paradox. Maybe an eternal trauma compressed into time, a suffering required purely for the creature's benefit, not God's.
And finally, fourth, we, the completed creatures, achieve an eternity, yes, but it's an eternity defined as the infinite extension of time. We remain bounded by sequence, forever learning and growing, while the author of time, God, resides in the perpetual now, experiencing our entire timeline concurrently, holding the completed movie reel.
Yeah, I think that covers the main arc. Ultimately, the source material forces us to recognize this vast, almost terrifying ontological chasm between the creator and the created. Our reality, our deeply felt perception of time, space, cause and effect, even the permanence of our own existence is potentially fleeting, optional, perhaps even illusory from the perspective of the truly eternal, and the incarnation, the second person becoming one of us, was the one necessary, incomprehensible act required to bridge that gap, to complete us without consuming us in the process.
It's a profound thought to end on, definitely. We started this deep dive by asking how God eliminates sin by becoming a creature within time and space. And we end, really, with the ultimate paradox, building directly on that movie analogy from the source. If the completed time and space is like a movie that is already finished for God, if the entire story, every scene, every choice, is already eternally present for the author, what does that truly imply about the nature of our free will and our perceived future right now as we live through the movie frame by frame? If the whole reel is already complete, every choice already known, every outcome already realized from the divine perspective, how does our moment-by-moment choice still hold genuine meaning within that infinite extension of time? What are we actually choosing?
That's the question, isn't it? A question that potentially redefines the very essence of human agency and responsibility. It forces you, the listener, to ponder whether free will truly exists in the decision itself, or perhaps in the necessary willing unfolding of a perfect, already completed script. Something to think about.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly deep dive.